Good afternoon, and welcome to How to Build a Holistic Data Ecosystem Accessible for Everyone, from data analysts to clinicians. A webinar tweet chat combo from healthsystemcio.com, sponsored by Collibra. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Health Systems CIO, and I will be your moderator today. We are having a simultaneous tweet chat hosted by Kate Gamble, our Managing Editor and Director of Social Media. You can participate in a separate browser or on your phone by using the hashtag HSCIOchat, or you can simply view the tweet chat in the Media Viewer panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll also be using the Q&A panel today. You can send your questions in as they occur to you. Leave the default set to all panelists, and we'll pose them to our panelists later in the program. And you can download the deck by using the URL on your screen. It's at the bottom of our slides, and it's been sent out in the chat box. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today, first we're going to go about 35 minutes with our featured panel discussion with Rajan Chandras, Director of Data Architecture and Strategy with NYU Langone Health, Tom Hammergren, System Executive, Analytics and Decision Support with TriHealth, and Chris Cooper, Healthcare Sales and Strategy Leader with Collibra. So without any further delay, we're going to jump right into our conversation. Tom, let's start with you. Can you give us an overview of your organization and your role there?
Sure. I represent an organization by the name of TriHealth, and it's an integrated healthcare system that was formed really with a partnership between two major hospitals in Cincinnati, Good Samaritan and Bethesda, back in '95. TriHealth's really a full-service, not-for-profit health system and provides a full gambit of health services to this region. We're the fourth largest employer in Cincinnati, have approximately 1,200 team members and nearly 600 employed physicians, and we're up to 5 hospitals and about 140 other sites for care. And as far as myself, once again, my name is Tom Hammergren. I'm accountable for analytics across TriHealth, so this actually includes a broad brush of services. So we have operational analytics, clinical analytics, a data science or advanced analytics team. I also have responsibility for the data warehousing team, interoperability, and a couple of other related IS services around that, and then also have external reporting for regulatory and clinical registries, as well as analytical governance and a piece of revenue management.
So they keep you busy over there, sounds like.
Yes.
Very good. All right, Rajan?
Thank you, Anthony. So I'm at NYU Langone Health. NYU Langone is a premier academic medical center. We're at the forefront of patient care, medical education, and scientific and clinical research. We run the NYU School of Medicine, which I think was recently ranked amongst the top 10 in the country. It's consistently been ranked very high. We also operate a number of hospitals and ambulatory clinics, and these have consistently received the highest recognition in quality of care. We also rank the highest in NIH research funding per faculty. We are primarily located in Manhattan, and that's where I work as well, but we are spread across most of New York City and a little bit of Long Island as well. My title here is Director Data Architecture and Strategy. I also have a title of Director Information Management. I wear a few different hats like Tom. My responsibilities are mostly in areas of data architecture, data strategy, master data management, reference data management, data governance, and big data engineering.
Very good. Thank you. Chris?
Thanks, Anthony. Chris Cooper, I am part of Collibra's healthcare team. Collibra is a data governance and platform and data catalog solution vendor. It really focuses on helping organizations consume data across the enterprise, providing a very flexible platform to support governance and data catalog needs. I'm fortunate enough to work with a number of our healthcare provider organizations as well as a few of the payers across North America. Healthcare is one of 2 vertical industries for Collibra, and certainly we have seen great success helping organizations really understand the information and the data assets that they're using to drive their transformation and adoption to that change in the healthcare market.
Very good. All right. In the abstract for this webinar, we use the term data citizen to describe anyone from data analysts to clinicians from an organization who might need to create a report or run a data query. When trying to serve these data citizens, what level of data literacy are we assuming? So who are we targeting? Who's our model user? And obviously, if you have someone more sophisticated, they're able to handle that, but you don't want to create something that your less sophisticated users, which can be sometimes the clinicians, although they're very bright people, they're not data scientists, can deal with. So, Rajan, what's your thoughts around that?
So at NYU Langone, our data citizens range from business users to clinical quality analysts, to researchers, to AI developers, to active clinicians. That includes, as you mentioned, physicians, we have got specialists, and even surgeons who are very, very engaged data citizens. So we really look at data literacy a little differently. The thing is, in terms of structural familiarity, clinical data can be highly complex, and it needs a very educated data citizen, so to speak, to be able to query that data. So depending on the requirement, users may need to run prepared reports, or they might want to slice and dice pre-programmed dashboards, or they may need clinical data extracts that basically protect them from the complexities of clinical data. Increasingly, however, we are seeing a demand for self-service analytics that requires a high degree of data literacy. The second factor is that clinical knowledge is very important. So merely understanding table structures and column definitions really isn't enough. Users need to be able to understand how the EHR, the electronic health record, in our case we use Epic. So how the EHR manages and interrelates data, how are clinical transactions related to relevant reference terminologies, and how to query complex clinical processes like encounters and orders and medications and procedures and claims. Lastly, to have sustainable self-service analytics, which is a little bit of a holy grail, just having smart individual users really isn't enough. And the part of the challenge with working in an academic medical center is everyone out there is smart. They're all really brilliant. We want to take this literacy to the next level and not just create educated individuals, but we want to create an empowered, self-driven community of data citizens. So really speaking, our goal is to empower them and get the heck out of their way.
Very good. Tom?
I'm going to say he did a great job going through that. I'm going to take us down a little bit of a different path just to sort of talk about our history. We really started a journey to start creating sort of the literacy and data citizens about a year, maybe a year and a half ago, because our history really was very siloed. So we historically bought an application or a system and then put a human on it, and they became a domain expert just for that system. So the thing we found is that people didn't really understand the process or the patient's flow through the system. They understood what they did ambulatory, but they didn't understand acute, and so on and so forth. So what we're really working to do is really crossing people, process, and technology, where we're realigning analysts, which is really sort of our first core data citizens, to business units or functions or service lines. And with those leaders, we're having them work with the analysts to really bring them up to speed on their business and what their business is all about, because we want the analyst to really be a member of that management team that thinks of the business through the lens of the data. And on the IT side, we're taking those things as requirements and starting to move into more of an architectural certified data set mindset to get us on the journey to self-service, where historically we've been very much a request-response sort of report and dashboard-centric mindset. So I think when we really look at this, we're building this buffer with the analyst as our first stage into this, which would be the people that are really tasked with domain-level knowledge and high literacy to help translate that out to their supported population. And in the same vein, be able to translate the business needs down to the IT guys to build the right sort of data. So hopefully that gives you a feel of where we are.
Tom, I like that approach a lot. You guys are engaging your analysts and business users, and then bringing in IT to support that. Sounds like a really good approach.
Rajan, do you think are you taking the same approach, or is that an approach that you find intriguing?
No, we're taking a very similar approach. In our case, it's very much business driven and business value driven. So in our case, it's really our clinicians and our physicians who are really coming to us increasingly, wanting to know more about data, wanting to know more about what they can do with data, and challenging us, in effect, to make them better data citizens. So it's really a very interesting situation.
Chris,
I would just add to that, I think the challenge that we've seen is, I always call it phone a friend. So historically, it's been a phone a friend culture, and people would go to the wrong data source with sort of the silos of data that we have. So that's really the discipline that we're looking at. And I keep feeling like it's a journey. It's not something that we're going to fix tomorrow. And it requires a high degree of discipline and sort of executive level support to make sure that this can work, because quite honestly, the demands for the data is so high on a regular basis that a transformation like this can be disruptive in the wrong way to where people are trying to fulfill. So we're trying to, live in both worlds as we go forward.
Chris, what do you think about these points that are being made?
Yeah, I think that certainly both Tom and Rajan capture certainly very much the spirit of where Collibra sees the need for data citizens to get engaged, a phrase we're incredibly fond of. And it's really about this breadth of engagement, knowing that the context or the metadata, the additional information that a floor manager or department manager needs versus what a data scientist needs is very different. So being able to provide the appropriate context around the data task that's being engaged is incredibly important. And certainly from Collibra's perspective, we really look to meet the user where they are in their environment. So whether it's being able to integrate a catalog of reports directly into the EHR so that the user doesn't even have to leave that experience, or being able to push definitions of key terms and metrics out to the BI platform, so the user, whether they're, just clicking through a dashboard, can really understand what's the data that was used to drive this report. Did that come from both our inpatient and ambulatory systems? Being able to answer those questions in the user's context really helps meet the user where they are from a skill perspective, and certainly establishing that process to start to look for certified assets that have been through an approval process, and really training and providing those visual feedbacks so that you can seamlessly integrate your governance activities into the user experience, whether they're operating in the EHR on a regular basis or if they spend their time in the depths of the data marts and data lakes across the organization.
Very good. Very good. All right. Let's start with you, Tom, on this question. How are you working in your organization to make it easier for data citizens to get the information they want?
I think there's a multi-part answer because, once again, I think one of the challenges that a lot of us in healthcare probably face today is the blend between bought systems and built systems. So we've I always use an example of Encounter. There's probably 10 different places I can go to get an Encounter, and therefore understanding the sort of context that's going to sort of drive me to where I need to go. So we're looking at the governance process to start taking major domains and really get those clearly well-defined into that point of a certified data set that, once again, the analysts can use. But for the general population, what we really started going through is what I'll call a report, although it's dashboards, reports, data sets, pivot tables, all the things that users tend to consume the data with. We're actually going through a governance process with that, where we're working through more business nomenclature and naming and tagging of those assets, and then we're creating a uniform portal for people to very rapidly be able to search, find those things, and filter those down, as well as tap into the analysts so that there's like a home page for the analyst community, because we, like probably everybody else, probably have at least 10 reporting platforms that are being used, so that it's not like you can go to one business intelligence tool or one visualization tool and get everything you need. So we are, I think one of the things we titled this webinar with, we're trying to put the Amazon layer on top where people can very quickly and efficiently search, find things, mark them as their favorites to get the information that they need. And then with the smaller community of analysts, we're really working on the certified data sets that then architecturally will become the underpinnings of all of those reports.
Very good. Rajan?
So I agree with Tom. It requires efforts at multiple levels, and it's a long journey. It's really important, though, because in the end, IT is always going to be limited in its capacity to serve business. And very increasingly, we find that business is very, very data hungry. So what we really want is to continue to make data more easily available for our data citizens, and really to increase the population of data citizens. So like everyone else, we have an enterprise data warehouse that integrates data from sources across the institution, and of course our users and analysts have access to reports and dashboards that take data from this data warehouse. For more hands-on and advanced analysts, we have established a data lake that uses the Hadoop Big Data platform, and we have found that is truly empowering our users. In fact, it's the concept that we have, the architecture that we have, goes a little beyond the data lake, and I've coined a phrase called a data hive for that. I had a great presentation on that architecture and our approach at HIMSS last month, and I'll be presenting again at Strata later this year in New York. So if any of you happen to be attending Strata, do drop in onto my presentation, and I'd love to meet you as well. But essentially, our data lake, our data hive, is a highly flexible, scalable, secure, and governed platform that's driven by business value. So that's for our hands-on and advanced analysts. But at the end of the day, data provisioning is only half the story. The other half, as Tom referred to, is in creating, organizing, and sharing knowledge. And that happens through data governance and building a data community. So to help us with that, we invested in a data governance solution last year to basically organize and institutionalize our knowledge. For example, business vocabularies, lineage, reference data, information catalogs. And we are looking to embed that into our operational processes and our systems. And this latter part is really important. We don't want it to be just a technology or a tool. We really want to make that part of our fabric, part of the way we work. We are in the early stages of that journey, but it's been really a pretty good start, and we are very optimistic. And the last thing is, using all of the above, we want to continuously build a community. So using our data sources, our data repositories, the data governance tools and technologies and the processes that go along with it. We want to use all of this to continuously build a community of better informed and better connected data citizens who can then grow their own knowledge and help each other grow. So that, we want to help make them data citizens, but we really want them to share the burden of growing their own knowledge and not make it an IT thing.
Okay, very good. All right, next question. Let's stick with you, Rajan. What is your approach to data governance?
Well, that's a loaded question. Because the trouble with data governance is that there is no single definition or common understanding of what constitutes data governance, let alone agreement on how about to go about doing it. So, if you go out and look at all the definitions, if you just browse the web and look at the definitions of data governance, they are literally bewildering. And that's partly because there are a lot of things that fall under the data governance umbrella. There's master data management, reference data management, business vocabularies, data quality, data lineage, metadata management. Sometimes things like data protection, data provisioning, consumer consent, and access controls are also clubbed under data governance. So for our purposes, we focus on the first set of things as data governance, which is things like MDM, reference data management, vocabularies, and so on. So we have a multifaceted approach to data governance. We get direction from the C-suite and our CIO on matters of strategy. For example, to have a single enterprise data warehouse to drive institutional analytics that are used from the trenches right up to the CEO. In fact, this was a CEO-driven initiative. Then another decision, executive decision that might not seem like a data governance decision, but it really drove data governance in a huge way, was to focus on a single EHR across the enterprise. That really simplifies data management and data governance in a huge way. Our CIO is extremely engaged in high-level data strategy. I won't go into all the details here, but more operationally, we have a master data management hub that integrates provider and faculty data into a single source of truth. We also have a very robust and mature governance of our business vocabularies, business metrics, and business terms. And these really drive our performance dashboards. In other areas, we are really looking to mature very quickly, and now especially that we have the right data governance technology, for example, in reference data management and catalogs. And I would say last but not the least, excuse me, we are looking to integrate our data lake into our data governance fabric, so to speak, so that the data lake is not something that's outside of it, but it's part of what we do in enterprise data governance.
Very good. Tom?
Yeah, I echo a lot of stuff that was just stated. I think when we started our journey, ours was very much CEO-led as well. We had a new CEO that came in and wanted to really have a balanced scorecard, and also brought in technologies to have every leader have metrics that are cascaded from the balanced scorecard, so that uniformly the leadership was all focused in the right direction with what the enterprise strategy was. So based on that, we really started our initiatives, and I always recommend to people this is a good place to start if you've got that level of sponsorship around metrics, and specifically performance metrics that will really drive the strategy, because the more it's connected, the more the executives are going to be connected to the governance process. Now, going through that, it's very interesting how words are just used to describe the metrics, and there's no standardization. So as an example, we're going through a population health transformation from a business standpoint, and the concept of attributed lives is a word that a lot of people throw around, but not many people truly understand what it means. So we actually had to work with the C-suite to make sure, terminology-wise, we were all using the same words. By the way, this is still a struggle because we do a lot of print stuff, so there's boards that have the strategies, and those boards potentially weren't printed with the same words that the tools have. So we're continuing to evolve through that. But we started really with performance management. From the balanced scorecard, we went down to each pillar, and we're sort of working at that level now to get more performance metrics that are more, once again, enterprise level. So whether it's quality or our service pillars or finance pillars or people pillars, we're working on, a whole host of metrics. So, that gets into not only the terminology and how people use those things, but what are the numerators, what are the denominators, what are the inclusion criteria, the exclusion, to who's the owner of that metric. And as we start connecting these things, there's also policies for usage that we're starting to work into. So I would say that was our first leg into it. That has obviously moved us closer, and we're starting our journey on things like provider master data, as we've recently launched a new physician finder and things on the web that really sort of highlighted that the business process for identifying providers, defining their credentialing, defining the services that they actually render to the public, all the way to are they in HR and can we bill for them, and do they have an open panel. Those things are all managed from different business units, different functions, and potentially different systems. And so we worked pretty hard to get business sponsorship to really move into the master data initiatives and start correcting those types of things. And then last but not least, we've been going through an effort to take our in-house data warehouses, which we had more than one. And I would say the ones that we had were sort of application dependent report marts. So we're moving more into an enterprise data warehouse structure, and that's driving the other aspect of this where we start looking at key data sets that we're supporting analytical work with. I used the example of Encounter before. I'll keep using that, where there's a financial way of looking at an encounter, there's a clinical way of looking at an encounter. We're making sure that the data sets have proper qualification from a terminology and sourcing standpoint so that people start directing their queries to the right source of information, where before they might be just going to the wrong place because the words are the same. So I would say that's our approach. It's really starting from the top, from a metric, and then working its way down through the data sets.
Very good. Chris, thoughts on data governance?
Obviously, I think that, as indicated here, it's a multifaceted approach. I think, some of the things that, Tom and Rajan both outlined are things that we're seeing as really key to success. And while certainly those activities around establishing common definitions for the terms across the organization in some ways feels a bit mundane, the reality is that that's the way our leadership, folks across the organization, talks and thinks about the various concepts that ultimately they want reflected back into the data. And so being able to establish that common understanding of what terms mean, how they're derived, as well as being able to really pull together a common understanding of what is our information landscape and where does the responsibility lie, even if we haven't fully deployed and standardized from a definition perspective across the organization. Just being able to understand those responsibilities really helps facilitate this collaboration process that ultimately Collibra views as the core of governance, which is bringing together the stakeholders across clinical, operational, business, and IT sides of the organization to collaborate more effectively.
Very good, very good. All right, next question. Address each of these items that commonly contribute to a hard-to-navigate data environment, data housed across multiple reporting tools and warehouses, data insufficiently labeled, and data that is simply not searchable. Chris, you want to talk to each of those a little bit and how they can come up and be a problem?
Yeah, sure, Anthony. And we see this in spades, and thus the reason we've seen a lot of organizations dovetail a cataloging effort across their organization into their governance program, because immediately after you've reach that consensus or start to understand what are the concepts, people really want to understand where is this data actually housed across the enterprise. So being able to reach out to your existing systems, your data warehouses, those data marts and data lakes in their numerous permutations that exist, and being able to catalog those and bring those into a common metadata repository and actually assign some ownership and start to identify what are the high-value assets is incredibly important. And that really feeds into this ability to actually put some definition around these data assets. Organizations have hundreds of thousands of columns of data, millions of columns of data that are expanding across the organization. And so leveraging technology to start to make those associations between the business concepts and the underlying data structures and suggest that for human review is incredibly important to reach the scale that organizations are dealing with. And we see that being able to harvest the technical metadata across the organization and facilitate that collaboration around common definitions and then using technology to link those together really helps break down some of those silos. Another big thing that we're seeing within our organizations is introducing the notion of curated data sets. So working across the organization so that you don't necessarily have to know what data warehouse a given data asset lives in, but I'm able to identify a set of data related to our blood management program or a given clinical quality measure, and understanding what data is within that ecosystem at a logical level, and being able to associate then the underlying technical representation of that data and work with those logical data sets is a key feature. And certainly, as we start to search across this data set, Collibra really looks to leverage the metadata that we have in the environment, whether it's the structural metadata of the data warehouse or the associated inference that can be made from systems that's associated with, to bring that together to make data not only searchable in the classic search engine context, but to really make it related so that you can start to organize data assets by department or community or system or working group, so that you can really start to narrow the aperture at which your users need to start to sift through the breadth of data assets into a much more logical categorization that may be independent of what systems actually generated that data underneath.
Very good. Tom?
Yeah, I would say the way that we're looking at this, because I think all of these points, every one of us has to live through this pain, and it's like, where do you start? Because there's such a large legacy that you're inheriting that it's kind of hard. You can get sort of sensory overload. But the way we've sort of partitioned this is to look strategically and really start approaching almost a portfolio type of approach for the solutions that we offer to the users. And a lot of that's really driven by strategic initiatives. So I had mentioned population health is a large piece. We're also going through a high reliability exercise on the quality side. And those business initiatives are driving us to get metrics and data sets prepared. So for those things, you're either retooling what already exists or potentially creating new, so that really doesn't fall in line with some of these things. The second piece that we're doing is really looking at all the assets that we have and saying, to Chris's point, how do we get a catalog of that? And we really sort of taken, and we are taking a multi-phase approach to this, where the first sort of tactic is really having this analytics organization homepage or portal or whatever you want to call it that allows people to really search or find assets by asset type. So that could be a report, it could be a dashboard, it could be a data set. It's the various ways that they're currently getting the data. We're tagging things with what domain they come from. And that way, if people are looking at revenue cycle information or hospital billing information or attribution information, that it gives them a way of very quickly narrowing down the assets. We're also looking at it organizationally because some of these things have been built for the Cancer Institute or the Heart Institute. And then I sort of had mentioned in our strategy, we really have started focusing on our 5 pillars. So we also let them filter it down based on pillar. And then last but not least, there's still users out there that say, I know I have this Excel report. So we actually use the tool as another way. So in the portal, and by the way, we have a search version of this. We're getting ready to come out with our second release by the end of this fiscal year, which is by the end of June. They'll be able to multi-select those tags and narrow down the assets, because I think one of the things is how do we keep the ongoing operation working? And the easiest way that we've looked at that is how do we tag the assets that we have now, monitor those, figure out which ones are actually being used and which ones aren't, so that we can retire things, and then focus our energies on the tactics on those things that are more broadly used and add greater value to sort of fix. And that whole portal strategy is a tool agnostic strategy. So whether they're in business objects or Crystal or Tableau or Excel, it doesn't matter. We are sort of pulling all of those assets into one singular portal. And based on doing that, the ability to search as well as sort of structurally navigate those things also lends itself to people looking at a report and saying, I like this report. Are there similar ones where we can take what we've tagged on those and sort of reapply the search? And as they find those things, then they can tag them as their favorites, which allows us to also get a better understanding of the inventory that we need to retool. So that's sort of the tactics that we've taken. One is to really work on those strategic initiatives that are having us do it almost the better or right way. The second is really how do we wrap and embrace the existing technology under a better structured, better understood asset management model.
Very good. Rajan?
So several years ago, when our CEO and Dean, Dr. Robert Grossman, took over, he realized the risks and inadequacy of fragmented data, and he mandated an analytic strategy based on an enterprise data warehouse that aggregated data from multiple corporate systems. That was a very far-sighted decision and really helped simplify things. More recently, as I mentioned, we acted on an increasing need for self-service data analysis and integration that cannot really be handled by conventional database technologies, and we established this data lake, or a data hive as we call it. These sort of solutions help drive data cohesion across the enterprise, and we continue to enrich both the data warehouse and data lake as needed. The challenge with data labeling is it's a pervasive problem, as both Chris and Tom mentioned. And part of the reason is that it's just too difficult and time-consuming to label everything. But perhaps the bigger problem is to determine exactly what is worth labeling. It's, you cannot possibly label thousands and thousands of columns and tables and so on. So really, the need to prioritize what needs to be labeled in terms of data, to bring your reports together into a tool where you can look at all the different reports and weed out the duplicates that Tom referred to. These are really challenges that are not insurmountable, but they require effort, they require persistence, they require support and commitment. The data that's simply not searchable, there can be many reasons, right? Oftentimes, the data is simply not accessible to end users, and it's simply not possible to provide every user with access to every data repository. And a data warehouse or a data lake definitely helps with that. A second thing is that users may have access to the data, but they don't have the expertise to search or query it. And a Google-like search can often have Google-like results where you come back with 5,000 results and you don't know what they mean. That's where cataloging can really be helpful. Tagging of data can be really helpful. There are at this point well-known approaches and solutions to these problems, but they all require persistence. They require support, budgetary support. They require time, but they can be overcome.
Very good. Chris, when you're speaking with customers, prospects, people inquiring about your services, what are some of the common problems that they're saying they're trying to solve?
Thanks, Anthony. And I think, certainly a number of those we've touched on today. I'd say the number one area is really around being able to find and understand the right reporting and analytic assets to support the organization's move to being much more data-driven in their overall approach. And some of that, as we've discussed, is because of the numerous silos of BI tools that have been built up over the year, vendor packaged and custom built in-house. And being able to understand the variations and why do we have 15 different reports that virtually seem to reflect the same information. So really getting at the core and starting to break down those problems is probably where most of our customers are really starting their efforts as they approach their governance programs, because it's the investment has been made from a warehousing and BI and a data lake perspective, and the organizations are really understanding that there's additional curation, there's engagement to tag and identify the appropriate data sets that are most relevant and go through a certification process and really bubble up the high value assets to the top of the heap that's driving a lot of these initiatives. A second area that we're seeing a lot of focus and need and challenge that organizations are really struggling with to get at that common definition of terms and acronyms. Tom spoke about this early on in the discussion, but whether it's understanding, does that operating margin calculation that we're using, does that include both our ambulatory surgery centers as well as our inpatient facilities? Getting to that level of clarity is still, I would say, a primary need for most of the organizations that we engage with. So I would certainly, for those listening in that feel like, gosh, we don't even, quite know where to start, and it seems like we're behind the curve, I would say hope is not lost. Really just starting that process to document and understand how are you defining core concepts, especially those at the executive level that are being used to drive strategy, is critical. And then I would also say that there's a lack of shared understanding. So it's great that you define things, but you've got to make sure that those definitions are easily available to the breadth of your data citizens, breadth of the organization, so that anyone who's working with that operating margin concept understands within the context of the data or the report, the conversation that they're having with finance, what is really meant by operating margin, so that we get to that specificity that's really critical to the process of leveraging data more effectively. And then finally, I think we're seeing a significant increase in organizations who are formalizing their data protection governance and best practices. So whether it's getting their arms around the data feeds that seem to pop up that are feeding data outside the organization, and making sure that those are actually linked to a core business process and there's contractual and security relationships in place is absolutely critical for organizations as they take data protection beyond just kind of bare bones HIPAA requirements, but starting to look at what is the process that we have in place to make sure that if a data feed is established with a third party, that on a periodic basis that's refreshed to somebody actually validate if that data should still be leaving the organization. Or we also see a big focus on organizations trying to establish more formal data sharing agreements and more fine-grained access control even to data within the organization, breaking down kind of the old paradigm of, it was either a black and white, you either have access to patient data or you don't, really starting to get to a much more fine-grained level of control so that you can actually understand who needs to approve data access requests in a timely fashion, and then actually have those implemented and revisited so that you have some control over and understanding around who and why access is provided to data. And then finally, I think that there's an ongoing response that a number of our customers and prospects are dealing with the regulations that's increasing visibility around data protection, whether it's GDPR for those organizations that have some international presence, or things like CCPA, the California Consumer Protection Act, that is driving a lot of organizations that we work with that have operations in California to really be looking at their overall approach to data protection, understanding at a systematic level, what are the process points and how do we identify where an individual's data may exist, and how do we respond to these new regulatory pressures to delete and forget individuals when needed, and identify where their data is being used to make sure that there's a good process map to our overall data processing facility. So a lot of different challenges that we're seeing, and some of them are very tactical and others are much more strategic. But across the board, we're seeing that organizations are understanding that this is a collaborative effort between business and IT, and not something that simply falls as an IT requirement.
Very good. Thank you, Chris. All right, we've got a little time for audience Q&A, so go ahead and send your questions in, and let me get our first question out there. Tom, let's start with you on this. What process or methodology do you use to route a user's data request to ensure you are accounting for the data citizen's data literacy level, as well as making sure the request gets routed to the right resource? Are they calling a help desk, submitting a help desk report request, submitting a request to a data governance committee, etc.?
All the above. We actually have one of the things we've sort of transformed, because we were in the traditional 18-month budget cycle where you spent 3 months figuring out what your operating and capital was going to be, and then you were fixed for 12 months after you argued for 3 months as to what you were going to do. We switched that to more of an agile process, and we trained everybody on SAFE as far as a method. And as far as the request process, once again, on our portal, we have the ability to contact, and that contact can sort of route them to their analysts, since that's sort of our support model. But we're trying to get people more towards self-serve, so there's also a request form that's on there. That then routes into a triage process, which takes those requests and places them within sort of the data domain that's being worked. And we really have 3 portfolios is the way that I would look at it. One's population health, one's clinical quality, and one's operational, that we actually work through prioritization with those people from the business side of things to make sure that we're doing the right work. And then from a release standpoint, with us moving towards a portfolio type strategy, it's almost like a product where we're doing release notes where we embed training, and we've really started moving towards more 2 to 3 minute video types of training that's available on the portal as well, so that people can not only self-serve from the report, but also get the information that they need to grow their literacy as we do the release. So in a quick answer, that's sort of how we go through our process.
Very good. Rajan?
Yeah, the answer is very similar for us as well. We have a help desk process where anyone who wants access to data can submit requests, and then we go through a process of evaluating the request and reaching out to the individual's managers as required to figure out exactly what their requirement is. Why do they need this access to this data? And again, this is clinical data we are talking, so there's PHI involved, and we have not only clinicians but researchers involved as well. So we have to make sure that that data access is given in a very controlled manner. Once we make the determination, then we provision access. And of course, we have a number of alternatives as to where we can provision the data from or satisfy the request. It could maybe they just need access. They just need some reports that already exist. Maybe they need a new report. Maybe they just need access to the data lake. We figure out based on their requirement, and then we will provision access accordingly. That's the short answer.
Very good. All right. I just want to get in one more little segment here. It's our Ask a Co-Panelist segment. I'd like to give Chris an opportunity to ask one or both of his co-panelists a question. Go ahead, Chris.
Sure. Thanks very much. Rajan, certainly good to reconnect with you. I know that certainly NYU Langone had a governance process that was in place to define measures and KPIs and some of the terms that we've talked about as critical to the organization, leveraging a homegrown solution prior to moving towards the Collibra platform. What has the organization found as you've moved towards a more enterprise approach from a governance platform perspective?
So we found a good acceptance of moving towards the new platform. We found our users are using that platform, and we found that they're just more interested in doing more things with the platform. And a number of different use cases are essentially coming up in areas of reference data management. We're finding the need, and sometimes it happens that when you have a tool, you find different use cases that the tool can satisfy, and we are seeing that happen as well. So now that we have a tool that can catalog things for us, along with the governance process that goes with the catalog, not just a listing technology, we can start creating some interesting catalogs that are not limited to your conventional data catalogs or conventional reporting catalogs. So we are finding out that we can really come up with some innovative solutions of our own based on platform capabilities. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
That's great, Rajan. Really appreciate it.
Chris, did you have one for Tom or no?
Yeah, Tom. Certainly, I know that your organization started with that executive view. As you've started to leverage that and kind of think about, how those, executive scorecards have been reflected, what, if you were starting your governance program again, what new activities might you put a higher priority on?
I think when we started, we really looked at it more from business literacy than technology literacy. So a lot of what we worked on was the business metadata. And I know you used the term operating margin. You could use operating revenue as another one, where I think most people would look at business on 101 and say everybody should understand that. But if you really look at every resource that works for an entity like TriHealth, there's a lot of people that are not financially bound. And therefore, knowing the business language is good. But for those that do, the sourcing becomes very important. So, one of the problems that we've had is the siloing of data, and therefore people assume that the metric is being served from a given source system where maybe it's from a different one. So I think we're now going back through and enhancing what we did with the metrics to make sure the sourcing is there, because it creates a level of distrust when people see a metric and the number that's being produced, even though it's an endorsed enterprise metric, isn't the number that they're used to. So we're going through a second wave, and I think we would have probably done the start to finish on the metrics to make sure that the sourcing was clearly understood, as well as sort of just the business definition, which was the numerator, denominator, inclusion, exclusion types of things that people are sort of used to seeing from a regulatory standpoint.
So tying that business metadata to the underlying technical metadata. Yep. Great.
Excellent discussion. Well, that's about all we had time for today. When you close out your WebEx window, you're going to be taken to a post-event survey. If you could take a moment and answer that, we'd appreciate it. Regarding continuing education, those of you who hold the CHIME CHCIO certification get 1 credit for attending our events. Please let CHIME know you were here, and if you've asked us to do so, we certainly will. You receive an email when our archive recording of this event has been posted to our YouTube channel. If you'd like us to produce a webinar on the topic of your choice, you can reach out to Nancy Wilcox from our team, and you can check out our website to view our upcoming schedule of events. So with that, I want to thank our panel, Rajan Chandras, Tom Hammergren, and Chris Cooper, and I want to thank Collibra for sponsoring this event, and I want to thank all you, our attendees, for continuing to come to our events. And with that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you all.